All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, today, Senate Republicans will vote for a $300 billion aid package for Americans in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The package is 1/3 the size of the already inadequate package that was assembled more than a month earlier, which sat at $1 trillion. But more than anything, it reinforces a troubling dynamic that I touched a little bit on in yesterday's show. I'm getting this sinking feeling in my stomach that we have learned absolutely nothing from the Great Recession of 2008. This really hit home for me when I saw Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer's statement hours after McConnell's bills revelation, saying the bill was going absolutely nowhere. It underscored that they were absolutely content to let the country burn until Election Day in order to help Joe Biden win the presidency. And the most egregious thing about this strategy is it's actually quite preferable to the Senate Republican caucus, because actually having to spend money for Americans is far more politically unacceptable to them than, losing the White House and control of the United States Senate. The nihilism on display from both parties is basically an exact repeat of what happened after 2008. Both parties absolutely do not want to do anything to help Americans at their greatest time of need in nearly a century. They just want to use the crumbs that they've thrown at workers to assemble a mediocre case for why they should be allowed to rule over the current mess of a system. And of course, they throw their own side, cultural red meat, whenever the time comes. What happened in 2008 is almost exactly what happened so far in this economic crisis. In the initial days, when people thought everybody would melt down, they passed the Troubled Asset Relief Program known as TARP. It bailed out the banks. Many Republicans initially voted against it, but eventually they reluctantly came around. Then, of course, Barack Obama won the presidency in the middle of the crash, and he was swept into office with a huge majority in the House and the Senate. But Obama, crippled by his deficit mindset, neoliberals in his own administration, and to be fair, an obstructionist Republican Party in the Senate, ended up offering a $800 billion stimulus full of a bunch of dumb programs, none of which included relief for homeowners. Then what happened? Well, homeowners never got their bailout. Everyone basically moved on. We were fighting about health care for the next year. That was it. It was over. Over the course of the rest of the Obama presidency, there was a vicious fight between Obama and the Republican Party. Obama argued he actually did a lot for Americans after the crisis, that his stimulus package was historic, and he would point to rising numbers of jobs and a drop in the unemployment rate and GDP. The Republicans would argue that actually Obama spent too much money, or that in reality it was their bank bailout of 2008 which saved the economy, and Obama had nothing to do with it. What do those arguments have in common? They're both just arguing over scraps. Neither party had an affirmative plan to deliver more assistance. Why? Because their real constituents on Wall Street, the upper middle class, they recovered. 401ks came back, the top line economics looked fine, life for the top 25% of Americans in many ways never was better than the year like 2013. But underneath all of that was a festering wound that was inflicted at the heart of our economic life. Rural lower middle class Americans were historically underemployed, stripped from more stable jobs with benefits and turned into hourly automatons. The rise of Uber and other contract work that were basically turned into delivery people for the upper middle class. Factories left America in droves for Chinese or Mexican territory. Wages stagnated. Obamacare turned out to be a disaster, and quality of life payments went up. The gap between the richest and the poorest Americans had never been higher. And worse, the youngest Americans at the time, they entered one of the worst job markets for entrants in recent American history. They sucked it up, they moved into tiny shack apartments or back home with parents, and they took jobs that would never in a million years cover their student debt. For those who didn't go to college, the path of trying to join a union, work in your local community while being able to support your family, it was never even a reality, while it was for their father or grandfather. That festering wound broke open on election night in 2016. For a brief, shining moment, people actually paid attention. But Trump, for all his insight, basically just handed over much of his power to the GOP establishment. The Democrats decided that their support for mass immigration and Chinese offshoring had a lot less to do with his victory than Russia or James Comey. And the lesson was forgotten by both parties. Today, we see the consequences of that. We can already see the Trump campaign touting record economic growth, looking at bounce-back numbers, or trying to take credit for them. Just listen to Larry Kudlow yesterday.
We are in a self-sustaining recovery. Besides the jobs, we were in a housing boom,
We're in autos boom. We're in a consumer spending boom. Inventories are at rock bottom. They're going to be rebuilt. Small businesses have greater confidence. No, the economy is rebounding. It's V-shaped. It's going to be at least 20% in Q3 and probably Q4.
And on the other side, you have the guy who was literally number 2 during the hellish 2008 period that I described. All signs basically point to a return to this dynamic. If Joe Biden wins the presidency, you can be reasonably certain that he'll pass at least something through Congress. But given his commitments to Wall Street that nothing will fundamentally change, and his campaign's recent assurance to bankers that anything transformative in their plans is really just to keep the Warren people happy, you know what's going to be in it. If Trump wins, all he said so far is he's going to do a capital gains tax cut and maybe eliminate the payroll tax. Look, I doubt even that could get past the GOP-controlled Senate. In both cases, you can be mostly certain the help which was desperately needed so desperately 10 years ago is not going to come during the time next when it's needed again. All signs are already around us. Politicians and Wall Street are talking about how the unemployment rate is only 8%, so it's not that bad. But permanent job loss is skyrocketing. CEO confidence is up, but nearly 1/3 of Americans say they can't meet their most basic expenses. America's billionaires actually made $242 billion more in the middle of this crisis, and the top 20% of American workers have actually gotten a 2% raise from this pandemic, while the bottom 50 have had nearly a 20% drop. Eventually, this pandemic will end, but then the bills come due for the eviction moratorium, the months of back rent, utility bills, car payments, student debt. So much more will come due. Washington is probably not going to help you. And worse, a new generation of Americans is sitting at home on their parents' couch, taking Zoom classes, or trying desperately to find a minimum wage job without even an inkling that they're going to be able to live a better life than their parents or even older siblings. It's 2008 all over again. Honestly, it's worse. The only thing that really keeps me going politically is that last time around, it came with a vengeance in 2016. They almost heard some, briefly, at that time. The next time, when our voice actually breaks through, they are not going to be able to forget it. And that's really the way I've been thinking about it, Crystal. I just keep running through the scenarios in my head, and I see Pelosi rejecting it, and McConnell with the $300 billion, and the Senate Republicans who want to let the country burn for ideological reasons, the Democrats who want to do it for political reasons. And then that dynamic is just going to get flipped on its head. If Biden wins the presidency, what is he going to pass? You know, maybe $1 trillion. Okay. I mean, it's been 9 months of that year, a year. It's like you should have spent that 10 months earlier. And then what's ultimately going to happen? These kids who are out there racking up hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt in order to sit on a couch and watch Zoom, what are they going to do? What job are they going to get? I hear from so many of them, seniors in college. They're like, I don't know what I'm going to do when 4 years comes. Same thing over and over again. And if you are one of the, 2/3 younger Americans who doesn't go to college, what are you supposed to do? There's no union out there that's going to save you. What do you, like, move to an exurb and drive Uber Eats at 1 a.m? That's no way to live.
That's what it looks like. And you are so right that if you had to point to one moment that led to Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, by the way.
Of course.
It is that financial collapse and the failure to rescue the American working and middle class and homeowners in particular. The fact that everybody just went back to normal, bailed out Wall Street, CEOs, all the executives, they started getting their bonuses back again. No one goes to prison, and they act like everything's fine and we brought the economy back and it's all wonderful and great. And the reality is then, I don't think we had the language for it, but it was a K-shaped recovery too.
Exactly.
I mean,
it literally
exact
was K-shaped.
Same thing. I mean, the majority of jobs that were lost in the Great Recession were middle-class jobs. The majority of jobs that were gained out of it were low-income jobs. And that has set us on the trajectory to where we find ourselves today. And what are we doing once again, in maybe an even more remarkable fashion, creating this completely divided economy where you have, 20, 30% doing just fine, and everybody else who's basically their delivery drivers, just like you said. It is absolutely unconscionable, insane. And it also makes me realize, when that first CARES Act passed, we said, this is it. This is your chance to get it right. And it was done so quickly and they bundled in all the business provisions and they packaged it all together so that, they could put pressure on any progressives out there to say basically, or any populists out there to say basically like, well, you can't hold up aid for workers.
That's what they did to the Republicans.
So you got to go along with this because you can't hold up aid for workers. And there were pieces of it that at least were better than nothing. The $600 unemployment insurance that has now gone down to basically nothing and is basically gone, that was actually effective. But we knew at the time that the structure of the thing was rotten, that it did not have the longevity, that it did not automatically renew, that it didn't have the certainty and the stability that was built into it that many other developed world countries, which ended up, by the way, spending less on their stimulus.
Yeah, right.
But for a much more effective response, it didn't have all of that. And so it makes me go back to that original vote on that CARES Act, because we knew that they were not going to go back to the well. We knew that it was, and they didn't ultimately. And so, as we said yesterday, they're still doing this sort of like theater around, we're negotiating and maybe they're not coming to a deal. All that they're doing now is trying to posture on who gets the blame. And that's the reality of the situation we're in. And the ramifications are going to be huge, long-lasting, and I think transform the American economy and American politics forever.
It literally will be that flip dynamic where if Biden wins, they're going to be like, look, we passed this historic recovery. And then the Republicans will be like, no, actually, the recovery is because of Donald Trump's recovery and the CARES package. And then if it flips or if there's blame, it'll be the opposite, right? They'll be like, no, actually, it was the Democrats who passed this and it's the Republicans who are here to blame. Nobody actually wants to do anything for you. Nobody actually wants to do anything about what is happening. I am nearly certain we will have a mass homelessness crisis within like a year just because of the eviction moratorium.
Yeah.
And I have no confidence, zero, that they will bail people out.
They won't.
None. And I mean, and the back rent, whenever it comes to paid utility, and let's say even if they miraculously do something on rent, you think they're going to do anything on utility bills or car pay? There are just too many lost expenses out there, and bills got to come due for somebody. And then what's going to happen is that smaller businesses and others will go bankrupt. Even smaller landlords, maybe they'll get bought out by a commercial real estate firm, and everything's going to get rolled up even more to Wall Street and finance. You will have zero agency and control in your life, but. Look, I know this is really depressing, and I'm sorry, but that's just the dynamics that I see. And like I said, the only hope is that last time it all happened, it came crashing down in 2008. Well, not crashing, but it came crashing through, or in 2016. Maybe it'll take another 8 years, but it's going to happen. People like us are going to be out there at least pointing out what the reality is. And eventually, the bill will come due for the establishment, too.
I hope that's right.
All right, I'm looking forward to your Radar Next, Crystal.